3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. No text when I had knee surgery and spent 2 nights in a hospital bed watching bad cable TV and wondering if anyone was going to call. No word when my dog passed. The same shepherd mix she'd grown up with, the one she used to drag around by the collar like a stuffed animal when she was 5. Not even a read receipt on the message I sent when her grandmother died on a Tuesday morning in February, quietly, with me sitting beside her bed holding her hand, not knowing what else to do with myself except be there. I'd made my peace with the silence, told myself it was her life and she'd find her way back when she was ready. Men my age get good at convincing themselves of things like that. You have to, or you'd go under. Then last April, I posted a few pictures on Facebook of the lake cabin I'd bought up in the Smoky Mountain foothills. Nothing extravagant, 2 bedrooms, a deck over the creek, a wood stove I'd rewired myself out of 30 years of muscle memory. But it was mine, paid in full, the thing I'd promised myself when I sold the business, after building it from a single van and a borrowed tool account into something real. I put the photos up to share with a few old friends from the trade. I wasn't thinking about who else might be watching. My phone lit up on a Friday evening at 10:22. I was on the couch with my feet up, not really watching whatever was on TV, more just letting the noise fill the room the way you do when a house has been quiet longer than it should be. The number came up as unknown. I knew who it was before I finished reading the first line. You don't forget how your own daughter writes. Dad, it's Vanessa. I've been thinking about you. Garrett and I are having an engagement dinner at the house on the 18th. I'd love for you to be there. We're trying to close on a place before the wedding. Bring a check for $80,000. That's what we need for the down payment. Family takes care of family. I set the phone down on the cushion beside me, picked it back up, read it again. Not how have you been, Dad? Not I'm sorry for the years. Not even a by the way I'm engaged. Just a number, a date, and the quiet certainty of someone who has decided you owe them something and is simply letting you know how much. I want to be straight with you about what happened next, because it would be easy to say I was furious. In some ways easier than the truth. The truth is I sat there in the dark long after the TV went off, and what I felt was something softer and worse than anger. A hollow ache right below the sternum. The kind that happens when something you'd stopped hoping for comes back, but comes back broken. Because she'd reached out. After 3 years and 4 months and 16 days, my daughter had reached out. Welcome to Dad's Pure Revenge. Settle in, this one goes somewhere. I need to tell you about Vanessa's mother because nothing that happened existed in a vacuum. Connie and I were married for 17 years. Good years, then difficult years, then the quiet, deteriorating kind that nobody names until it's already over. We divorced when my daughter was 15, joint custody on paper. In practice, Vanessa stayed mostly with her mother, which was what she wanted, and I told myself every single time I drove away from that house on a Sunday evening that it was fine. What I didn't know, what I only began to understand much later, was what was being said about me in that house on the other 6 days of the week. Connie was never cruel in any obvious way, but she had a way of reframing the record. Turning the nights I worked late on a job that was running over into evidence of a pattern, turning every vacation I shortened to handle a crew emergency into proof of a character verdict. Your father's priorities are his own. Your father's generosity comes with strings. Your father loves the business more than he ever loved us. She wasn't entirely wrong. I worked too much. I know that, and I've sat with it. But there is a considerable distance between a father who was imperfect and a father who didn't love his child, and somewhere over those years, that line got moved in a way I didn't notice until it was too late to correct it. By the time Vanessa was 22, she'd stopped returning calls. By 24, the silence had settled in like weather. So I sat in my living room that Friday night and I thought about what that text really was. A clumsy, transactional, wrong-footed way for a daughter to reach back toward her father. Maybe. Or something else entirely. I didn't know yet. I didn't reply until the following evening. I sat with it. Prayed on it, which is something I started doing more of after I turned 55 and I'm still slightly self-conscious about admitting, and I kept coming back to 4 words buried inside that message. I'd love for you. 2 things can be true at once. A message can be a demand and still contain a door. I told her I'd be there. I didn't mention the check. But that same Saturday night, I opened my laptop, because 31 years of running a business taught me that before you walk into any situation involving money and someone you don't know, you do your homework. I wasn't going after my own daughter. I just wanted to know who Garrett was. His website was clean and professional in the way that costs money to appear effortless. Garrett Langford, Managing Director, Langford's Acquisitions Group, Real Estate Investment and Development, Properties across the Southeast. A portfolio page with renovation before and afters, testimonials in sans serif font, a headshot of a man in his early 30s with the kind of smile that looks warm until you notice it doesn't quite reach the eyes. I started running his name. The first result that wasn't his own website was a civil complaint out of Shelby County, Tennessee, filed 14 months prior. An older couple, retirees who'd invested $35,000 with Langford Acquisitions for a duplex renovation in Memphis, received 2 progress updates over 4 months, and then silence. When they hired an attorney 8 months later, they found the property had been sold to a third party without their knowledge. The case was marked as settled, terms sealed. I got up, refilled my coffee, and sat back down. I'm a retired electrician. I spent 3 decades reading blueprints, pulling wire, making sure the load math worked before anyone flipped a switch. Here's the thing about electrical work that people outside the trade don't always understand. A small irregularity in a circuit is never just a small irregularity. You don't file it away and move on. You trace it back to the source, because a fault that looks minor at the outlet is always connected to something bigger upstream, every time. People work the same way. Over the next 2 days, I found 4 more civil filings. Same pattern each time. Investors, older people, people who couldn't absorb the loss, handed money over for a named project, got a few months of communication, then quiet, then lawyers, then sealed settlements that kept the whole thing out of the news. On Sunday afternoon, I found the Tennessee Securities Division enforcement letter, filed 8 weeks earlier. A formal inquiry into whether Langford Acquisitions Group had offered unregistered securities, which, in plain English, means selling investment stakes without following the regulatory framework that exists specifically to protect people from operators like, apparently, my daughter's fiancé. The letter requested a full accounting of investor funds and included language that regulatory agencies use when they already know the answer and are simply building the paper trail. I printed everything, 51 pages, clipped them with a binder clip I found in the kitchen junk drawer, the same kind I used to use for job estimates. And then I sat at my kitchen table, the one where I used to help Vanessa with 5th grade fractions, where she once fell asleep mid-sentence telling me about a school trip because she was 7 years old, and it was past 10 at night, and she'd been too wound up to admit she was tired, and I stared at that stack of pages. My daughter was 3 weeks from marrying this man. He needed liquid cash. The securities inquiry meant his accounts were likely being scrutinized. Investors who'd been patient were starting to find lawyers. He needed money to fill gaps before the structure gave way. And my daughter had seen those cabin photos on Facebook, and somewhere in a conversation I wasn't part of, the words "my dad has money now" had been said aloud. That $80,000 wasn't a down payment for a house. It was a plug for a leaking ship, and I was being asked to provide the cork. I didn't call her. I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone, because the state of Tennessee was already doing its job, and my job was something different. I put the folder on the kitchen counter, I went to bed, and I told myself, the 18th, you'll know more. The 18th came gray and cold for April, which felt right. The dinner was at a house in a new subdivision outside of Murfreesboro. Every house on the street looked like the one next to it, and was trying not to. The address matched a property listed under a management company, not Garrett's name, a rental dressed up as an ownership, which is a useful trick if you need to appear more established than you are. I wore my good flannel shirt. My daughter used to tell me I dressed like I was always about to go fix something. She wasn't wrong, and I'd stopped apologizing for it around the time I turned 45. There were about a dozen people already inside when I arrived. Her mother was there. Connie caught my eye from across the room and gave me the particular look of someone who knows exactly how uncomfortable you are and has decided not to help. My daughter came toward me through the room. She looked beautiful in a way that also looked tired. There were shadows under her eyes that the lighting was soft enough to partially hide. When she got close, I could see them anyway. Dad, just that, not a hug, an assessment. Hey, sweetheart, I meant it, even then. Garrett materialized from behind her the way men who are performing confidence tend to appear in rooms. He shook my hand firmly and held it a beat longer than necessary, and when he said, "Walt, great to finally meet you," I smiled and said likewise, and noted that I hadn't told Vanessa my name was Walt. She had already looked me up. Either way, 2 of us had done our research. The first hour was just dinner, roast chicken, green beans, rolls from a bag. I sat across from my daughter and tried to have the conversation we'd been postponing for 3 years. She answered in short, careful sentences, the way someone speaks when they've been coached, or when they're bracing for something. How's the cabin? It's good. Are you settled in retirement? Getting there. Are you happy, Vanessa? She looked at her plate. We're eating, Dad. Garrett held court from the other end of the table, talking about a development deal in Chattanooga, using phrases like value-add acquisitions and secondary market fundamentals in a tone that assumed everyone already agreed he was the smartest person present. Two guests I didn't know, a couple in their 60s, were nodding along with the careful attention of people who had already written him a check or were considering it. I ate my chicken. I didn't say anything yet. After the plates were cleared, Garrett set down his wine glass and looked at me with the practiced warmth of a man who has decided it's time to close. Walt. He leaned back, easy, proprietorial. Vanessa tells me about the electrical business. 31 years, built it from scratch. That's a real story. Blue collar through and through. He said it the way someone says, bless your heart in the South, the compliment with the ceiling in it. 32, I said, by the time I sold. Right. And now you've got the cabin, enjoying the fruits of all that? Good for you. He smiled. We've been looking at some rural recreational acquisitions ourselves, actually. Lot of upside in that market right now. Vanessa was watching me. Her face had gone very still. I'm sure there is, I said. And then he got to it. He was smooth about the approach. I'll give him that. He talked about how much they both valued family, how the wedding was coming together beautifully, how all they needed to really start their life on solid footing was the right foundation, and how that foundation happened to require a down payment, and how family taking care of family was something they both believed in deeply. Vanessa figured you'd want to be part of this, he said. The 80,000, think of it as an investment in their future, in your family's future. Investment. He actually used the word investment. I looked at my daughter, waited for her to look back at me. When she did, I held her eyes and tried to find, behind the careful expression she was wearing, the girl I'd taught to ride a bike in the church parking lot on Maple Street when she was 6, the one who'd cried harder than I had the day that old Shepherd finally had to be put down. Vanessa, I said quietly, can you and I step outside for a few minutes? Garrett answered before she'd moved a muscle. We're all family here, Walt. Whatever's on your mind, you can say it. She didn't correct him. I looked at her for a long moment. I looked at the table. I thought about the 51 pages I'd left on the front seat of my truck. I stood up. I'll be right back. I walked out to the driveway, got the folder, came back inside. The room had changed in the way rooms change when someone does something that wasn't in the script. Garrett's expression had shifted barely, from easy to recalibrating. I set the folder on the table in front of my daughter. Everything you need to know about who you're about to marry is in there, I said. Not loud. The same voice I used when I had to pull a young apprentice aside and tell him, calmly and specifically, that the way he'd wired that panel was going to burn someone's house down if we didn't fix it before we left the job. Because that was what the moment called for. Not fury, precision. The civil suits from investors who lost money and couldn't get answers. The state securities enforcement letter filed 8 weeks ago. The registered business address that turns out to be a mailbox rental. I didn't go looking for trouble. I went looking for who my daughter was marrying, because that's what fathers do, and this is what I found. The room was absolutely quiet. Vanessa stared at the folder. She didn't open it. Garrett smiled, that same practiced, comfortable smile, and began to explain that those lawsuits were frivolous misunderstandings from people who hadn't understood the investment timeline, that the securities matter was a routine inquiry, that I was clearly operating from incomplete information, and he'd be happy to walk me through the details. I wasn't talking to you, I said evenly, no heat in it. I kept my eyes on my daughter. I'm not here about the money, I told her. I was never going to write that check. I came because you reached out after 3 years, and whatever else is broken between us, you're still my daughter, and I needed you to see what I found before you made a decision you can't walk back. I pushed the folder a half-inch closer to her. Open it when you're ready, or don't, that's your right. But you deserve to make this choice with the whole picture, not just the one he's showing you. I stood up. I thanked the other guests for the dinner and meant it. None of this was their fault. I put on my jacket. Garrett said something as I was buttoning it. I caught pieces of it. Something about making a scene. Something about how this was exactly the kind of thing Vanessa had warned him about. I turned and looked at him once, just long enough to let him know I'd heard him, and then I walked to the door. My daughter didn't follow me out. I drove the 2 hours home on I-40 with the radio off. Stopped at a Flying J outside of Cookeville for coffee I didn't need, but wanted something to do at the counter for a few minutes. Sat in the parking lot drinking it in the dark. I didn't feel like a man who'd accomplished anything. I felt like a man who'd done the only thing available to him, and was now entirely at the mercy of whether it would matter. It took 9 days. My neighbor called it to my attention first, saw something on the evening news, a local real estate investment firm, some kind of regulatory action. I went inside and looked it up. The Tennessee Securities Division had moved from inquiry to formal enforcement. Langford Acquisitions Group's accounts were frozen pending full audit. The filing alleged that Garrett had raised over $500,000 from 26 investors over 20 months, deployed a fraction of it into actual projects to sustain appearances, and redirected the rest into personal expenses and operating costs for a life that bore no relationship to his actual income. Restitution hearings were scheduled. Criminal referral language appeared twice in the document. His headshot from the website was in the article. Still smiling. I closed the laptop. I made coffee. I was going through a lot of coffee those weeks, and sat back in my recliner, and I thought about my daughter somewhere down in Murfreesboro, watching her future rearrange itself in real time, watching the man she'd planned a life around get folded up by the weight of his own construction. I want to be honest about what I felt, because the easy version is that I felt vindicated. The true version is that I felt heavy, sad in a specific, tired way that doesn't have a cleaner word for it. But underneath that quieter something else, something I recognized as relief, though not the kind I'd expected. Not the relief of being right, the relief of having given her the truth and having it reach her in time. She had the folder, whatever came next, she had the truth. Her car pulled up in front of my house on a Tuesday night at 9:45. The knock was fast and uneven, and then it stopped suddenly, like she'd exhausted herself just getting to the door. I heard it, and I knew what it was before I stood up. I opened the door. She was wearing the same coat from the dinner. Her hair was pulled back and half undone, and she hadn't fixed it, and somehow that detail hit me harder than anything else on her face. My daughter, who once spent 40 minutes on her appearance before a routine Tuesday at school, hadn't fixed her hair. Dad. Her voice came apart on the single syllable. He lied to me too. I didn't know how bad it was. I swear I didn't know. I read the folder the night you left. I read all of it. She stopped, breathed. Why didn't you stop it before it went this far? I stood in the doorway and let that land, because she needed to say it, and I needed to hear it before anything else. I tried to, I said. That's what I drove to that dinner to do. I asked you for 5 minutes alone. You told me he was your partner, and whatever I had to say could be said in front of him. She looked away. Something moved across her face. I know, she said, barely audible. We stood there. A car went by on the street. The neighbor's porch light clicked on. I'm sorry, she said, and then quieter, for all of it, for longer than just this. 3 years and 4 months and 16 days for those 4 words. I'd thought about what it might feel like when I finally heard them. I'd imagined relief or release or something that opened up like a window. What it actually felt like was quieter than that, a specific stillness. Like the moment after the power comes back on and before anything starts making noise again. I know, I said. I stepped back and held the door open. She came in and sat at the kitchen table and cried for a while, and I let her. I made tea, which is something my mother always did when someone was hurting, and I never understood why until I needed something to do with my hands. When she'd steadied, I sat down across from her. Here's what I'll do, I said. I'll pay for a good therapist, someone real, with credentials, someone who can help you figure out how you got here and how not to arrive here again. And I'll make sure you have a roof over your head and food in the refrigerator while you get back on your feet. Because you're my daughter and I love you, and that doesn't turn off because you've hurt me. She nodded, her hands around the mug. But the version of us where I'm a resource and you determine the price, that's done. And the life you were building with him, that's done. What I'm offering you is your father back, if you want him. She looked up at me. That's what I want, she said. I think it's been what I wanted for a long time. She stopped, shook her head. Mom used to say you only showed up when it was convenient for you. It was easier to believe that than to miss you. There it was. 3 years of closed doors in one sentence. Your mother isn't wrong that I worked too much, I said, but there's a long way between a father who made mistakes and a father who didn't love you. I don't need you to decide tonight which one I was. I just need you to be willing to find out. She was quiet for a while. Outside, a dog barked 2 houses down, then went still. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. I drove her to the Hampton Inn off the interstate because she was in no shape for the road and didn't want to deal with her mother's questions on the other side of town. Paid for 2 nights, told her to call me in the morning. Standing in that parking lot, she hugged me before she went inside. Not the measured, cautious thing from the engagement dinner doorway. A real hug. The kind that comes from somewhere honest. The kind I'd been keeping the memory of for 3 years, like something I wasn't certain still existed outside of memory. I drove home with the radio still off. The house was quiet when I got in. Same quiet it always is. I used to hear it as a room with something missing. Sitting in my recliner that night with the lamp on low, it felt more like a space that could still become something, like a circuit with the power restored, waiting to carry a load. Garrett entered a plea agreement 4 months ago. Several of those retirees will see partial restitution, not everything. It never is, but something. My daughter calls on Sunday evenings now. Not everyone, but most. We're careful with each other in the way you're careful with something you've repaired, aware of where the cracks ran, not pressing too hard on them. The therapy is helping, she says. She started to talk about what was said about me during those years I wasn't in the room, and what she's trying to sort out now between what was true and what was convenient. It's slow going. It's the real kind. I finished the back deck on the cabin last month, stacked firewood the way my own father taught me, which reminded me of him for the first time in a while. Maybe next summer my daughter will come up for a weekend. I haven't asked yet. We're moving at the pace the thing requires, which isn't always the pace you want, and is always the only pace that works. Some things take exactly as long as they take. The hardest part isn't the waiting. The hardest part is staying open enough to let someone back through the door when they finally show up at it, while being clear enough about who you are that they know what kind of place they're coming home to. I figured that out standing in a doorway at 9:45 on a Tuesday night, stepping back, holding the door open, letting my daughter decide. That's all any of us can do, in the end. Hold the door, stay steady, and trust that the truth eventually does the rest of the work for you.